Any further questions? So we will thank you all very much again, and we will move on to our next speaker, who is, we're going to double back on the list to someone who was a little earlier on the list, Chief Fox from the Enfield Police Department, after which we have Jeremy Stein.
I am here. Do you have me?
Yes.
Outstanding, and thank you for doubling back. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak before you this afternoon. I am Chief Alaric Fox of the Enfield Police Department. I have had the great opportunity to serve the town of Enfield as police chief for the past 3 years. This is my 38th year in the law enforcement field. I've made previous career stops as a Willimantic police officer, an FBI agent, and with the Connecticut State Police, from which I retired in 2018 as the State Police Colonel and the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. I join you this afternoon to offer my unwavering support for proposed House Bill 5583, an act concerning emergency intervention by a police officer when a person suffers an overdose. I know we've discussed it earlier in our time together, and you've heard from other speakers. I echo their sentiments. In summary, this legislation seeks to provide us with a much needed tool for those instances when an individual has suffered the opioid overdoses that you've heard of, but the emergency administration of Narcan by public safety personnel, but for that action, that individual would now be dead, at the risk of putting too fine a point on it. We have quite literally pulled these individuals back from the brink. Yet somehow, these same individuals, because at this very moment they are deemed to be of an appropriate mindset, are permitted to decline ambulance transport and refuse any further medical care. This is actually less than what is currently called for under Connecticut's protective custody statutes at 17A 503 for individuals with psychiatric disability, or 17A 683 for individuals under the influence of alcohol. We have had in Enfield multiple incidents where individuals have overdosed repeatedly, including some twice in the same night. Sometimes they are saved again, and sometimes they are not. The proposed bill is simply an effort to sync up Connecticut's statutory framework with the opioid scourge of our modern times. In other words, an effort to reconcile what the General Assembly allows at present for individuals suffering from psychiatric issues or alcohol intoxication with the current drug epidemic that we are facing. This will allow us to allow these victims an increased opportunity for medical care, guidance, and intervention at an area hospital. In summary, we continue as a state and as a nation to offer our frustration, our astonishment, and our search for answers at the opioid epidemic. This bill will be a significant step forward toward improving our response and rooting individuals that need care, that can't make and aren't making informed decisions for themselves, to that care. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Fox. Representative Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for accommodating our good chief. I know he had to jump out for a budget meeting, so I appreciate the indulgence. Welcome, Chief Fox, and you've always been a great advocate for adjusting the statute to kind of catch up with a modern issue. Can you touched on it in your testimony, can you talk a little bit about how this makes such a small change in the statute as to how we treat intoxication or somebody with some mental issues that needs to be taken into protective custody? Can you talk about how you're looking at this as a fix for today's problem with this epidemic crisis? I mean, the alternative to what we're offering here is no help, correct? To do nothing.
Correct, and I'd be happy to. So I think it's very important to start with that as the threshold in this analysis. We are not asking for a new law enforcement ability. The General Assembly in the state of Connecticut, in its wisdom, has said there are situations where individuals aren't in a position where they can make an informed, educated decision about their own best care. And this is not a right that we ask for lightly. This is limited to situations where the officer says, because of this individual's psychiatric condition, or because of this individual's intoxication by alcohol, we're going to have to exercise good judgment for them. And all that means for our purposes, under the current statutes or under what we seek under this House bill, is that the law enforcement officer would cause the routing of this person by ambulance to an emergency room. Or what we have and what we have had for the last 10 years is the incredible scourge of the opioid issue, but we haven't expanded the statutes that I referenced earlier to address this modern era. And the problem, of course, is that after the administration of Narcan, at that moment, this person who we know is in the throes of addiction, at that moment, the mindset is that that individual is making a sound choice, because at that moment, they are no longer under the influence of that substance. That's where this splinters off from the psychiatric or alcohol issue, even though we know that person is on a perpetual and in some cases terminal bad road. So at least through this, we will have a tool that is better than what we do now, which is say to the person, and I'm going to sound a little snarky here, I'm not going to sound a little snarky here, I'm not trying to, but I'm trying to make a point. Okay, you don't want care? Best of luck to you. And we leave them to their own devices. There's got to be a better approach than best of luck to you. And we think that is simply routing the person to a trained doctor, trained medical staff, where they can have a more informed discussion with that individual about treatments and course of care.
Thank you for that. I think you talked to a lot of concerns that people have expressed in regards to, if we do nothing, this is what happens. Can you talk a little bit about our neighboring states and their ability to do this now, and how it works in, especially to our north? I know Massachusetts has a pretty robust program that kind of grew with treatment centers just from simply doing what we're proposing today. So.
Yes, and that question came up earlier. Obviously, at that point, I was not a speaker. I was not dialed in. But Massachusetts has been a leader in this area, and I'm led to believe that Vermont may actually be going down this road or has gone down this road as well. I don't have the personal knowledge as to Vermont, but I certainly defer to other folks that might. We would not be, although I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, we would not be breaking new ground here. We would simply be following a statutory rubric or framework that our neighbor to the north, I'm sure amongst others, have adopted as a potential approach in this area to allow us, a phrase that was used earlier was so apropos, another tool on the tool belt to deal with these situations. And
in your humble opinion, and I just want to kind of say Chief Fox is very humble. So not only is he our chief of police, I think he outlined some of his history with law enforcement, which is very vast. But he is also an attorney, so is also very familiar with the statute. So he's very humble. But in your humble opinion, would this potentially save lives?
I am certain this will save lives. I am certain that there are individuals, anecdotally we know this, and statistically we know this, that it takes multiple efforts to break the addiction cycle. And we know the sooner we can get someone to care beyond Narcan in the body at the scene in the throes of death. We know the sooner we can get someone to either care or at least the opportunity for care, we will save lives. by taking this step. As it stands now, because it seems wholly ineffective and unnecessary and inappropriate, so we don't do it, to arrest this individual for being in possession of narcotics, we're actually asking for the lesser ability to simply route this person for medical care, to get them that assistance, to get them that guidance, to get them that counsel that we know that we as a state don't want police officers doing. Perhaps there's a question sometimes about whether police officers are the best messengers in this area. I want to use the statutes to get a person to care, to save their lives, to prevent this suffering.
Thank you, Chief. I don't think you could have said it better. You're such a eloquent speaker. I appreciate you hanging in there with us today. And Madam Chair, thank you for accommodating us with a circle back. I truly appreciate it. Thank you once again.